The hum of the ventilation system was my constant companion, a low, steady drone that filtered out the city's ceaseless thrum. Here, within the sterile confines of the pathology wing isolation chamber, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just me, the steel table, and the quiet dignity of the deceased. The air, scrubbed and recirculated, carried the faint, familiar scent of disinfectant and something else, a clean, metallic tang that always settled deep in my lungs. My realm, my sanctuary. I moved with a practiced economy of motion, each step precise, each tool selected without conscious thought. My hands, gloved in latex, were an extension of my will, steady and unyielding. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh, unforgiving glare, illuminating every detail, every nuance of the human form laid out before me. I preferred it this way. No shadows for ambiguity, no softness for sentiment. Just truth, stark and undeniable. This morning's assignment was a John Doe, a man in his late 60s, found unresponsive in his apartment. The preliminary report from the attending physician flagged it as a probable cardiac event, a quiet exit from a quiet life. Routine. The kind of case that filled the hours between the more complex, more gruesome puzzles that occasionally landed on my slab. I found a certain comfort in the routine, the predictable rhythm of examination, dissection, and diagnosis. It was a dance I knew intimately, a language I spoke fluently. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the clear plastic of my face shield for a moment before dissipating. His skin, cool to the touch, was marbled with the telltale signs of lividity, a purplish pooling on his back where gravity had drawn the blood. No obvious external trauma, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. His hands, gnarled with age, rested placidly at his sides. I ran my gloved fingertips over his scalp, feeling for any hidden contusions, any subtle depressions in the bone. Nothing, just the thin, sparse hair of an aging man. My eyes scanned his features, memorizing the slight asymmetry of his nose, the fine lines etched around his closed eyes. He had been well nourished, his frame still retaining some of its former strength despite the softening of age. A small scar, like a faint white whisper, arced above his left eyebrow, an old injury long healed, nothing to indicate anything but a peaceful, if solitary, demise. I began the incision, the scalpel blade gliding through the skin with surgical precision. The first cut, from the suprasternal notch to the pubic symphysis, was always the most visceral. The skin parted, revealing the subcutaneous fat, a yellowish layer beneath. I worked methodically, peeling back the layers, exposing the rib cage, the glistening musculature. Opening the chest cavity, I laid bare the thoracic organs. The lungs appeared congested, heavy, as expected for a cardiac arrest. The heart, enlarged and flabby, confirmed the initial suspicion. A textbook case, it seemed. I meticulously removed each organ, weighing them, examining them for macroscopic abnormalities, placing them in their designated trays. My focus was absolute, a tunnel vision that allowed no distractions. It was when I was examining the right femur, methodically scraping away the muscle tissue to reveal the bone beneath, that I paused. My instruments, usually an extension of my thought, faltered. My brow furrowed beneath the face shield. The bone felt off, not a fracture, not a tumor, but something else. A subtle irregularity in the shaft, almost imperceptible. I ran my finger over the surface again, feeling a minuscule bump, no larger than a pinhead, yet distinct. I picked up a pair of fine forceps, gently probing the area. The bone felt solid, intact. Yet there was a resistance, a density that shouldn't be there. It wasn't a calcification, nor was it a benign osteoma. It felt foreign. I took a microsaw, a delicate instrument I usually reserved for cranial sections, and carefully made a small window into the cortical bone at the site of the anomaly. What I found made the hair on my arms prickle. Embedded deep within the marrow cavity, perfectly encapsulated, was a tiny metallic sphere. It was no bigger than a peppercorn, yet perfectly symmetrical, its surface impassably smooth, reflecting the harsh light with a faint, dull gleam. There was no entry wound, no fracture pattern leading to its location, no external mark on the bone itself to indicate how it could have possibly gotten there. It was as if the bone had simply grown around it flawlessly, leaving no trace of intrusion. I stared at it, my mind racing through every known form of trauma, every surgical technique, every biological process. None explained this. A microfragment from an old injury. Impossible. The sphere was too perfect, too uniform. A bullet fragment. No, it lacked the characteristic deformation, the rifling marks. And again, no entry point. How could something so dense, so clearly artificial, become lodged so deeply within a bone, without disturbing the surrounding tissue, without leaving a scar, without any macroscopic evidence of its journey? My isolation chamber, usually a place of quiet certainty, suddenly felt charged with an unsettling energy. This wasn't routine. This wasn't a cardiac event. Today's subject was a man in his late 50s, found slumped in his armchair. The preliminary report from the first responders and the attending physician at the scene had been straightforward: apparent cardiac arrest. No signs of struggle, no suspicious circumstances, just another statistic in the relentless march of time. My job, as always, was to confirm the narrative or, more importantly, to uncover any deviation from it. My scalpel rested on a sterile tray, its keen edge gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. I ran through the external examination first, a ritual of observation. The man's skin was pale, his features placid, almost serene. No defensive wounds, no contusions, no petechiae to suggest asphyxiation. His hands, though slightly calloused, showed no recent trauma. His clothes, now bagged and tagged, had been unremarkable. A simple sweater, faded jeans. Everything pointed to a quiet, natural end. Yet the small voice of intuition, honed over 2 decades of examining the dead, whispered a faint dissent. It wasn't a warning, not yet, just a quiet prompting to look deeper than the obvious. I began the internal examination, making the Y incision with practiced ease. The skin parted cleanly, revealing the underlying fascia and muscle. My instruments moved with a precise ballet, each cut, each separation deliberate. The rib cage was opened, the sternum lifted, exposing the thoracic cavity. The lungs appeared unremarkable, pinkish gray, no signs of aspiration or significant edema. The heart, when I lifted it, felt normal in size and texture. I knew what I was looking for. Blockages in the coronary arteries, myocardial infarction, any macroscopic signs of cardiac disease. I began the dissection of the heart, sectioning the ventricles and atria, examining the valves. The coronary arteries showed some plaque buildup, typical for a man of his age, but nothing severe enough to cause an immediate, fatal event. The myocardium itself seemed healthy, no significant scarring or necrosis. This was where the first flicker of unease began. If not a massive heart attack, then what? The initial report felt less certain now. Moving to the brain, I carefully opened the cranium. The dura mater was intact, the brain itself appearing normal in size and shape. I lifted it from the cranial vault, feeling its familiar weight. As I began to section it, making precise cuts through the cerebral hemispheres, cerebellum, and brainstem, I focused on the intricate vascular network, and then I saw it. It wasn't a hemorrhage, not a tumor, not a malformation. It was far more subtle. Deep within the substantia nigra, a region of the midbrain, I noticed a minute discoloration, a pinprick of something incongruous. It was barely visible to the naked eye, a faint, almost imperceptible grayish speck against the healthy tissue. My breath hitched. I paused, my scalpel hovering. My brow furrowed. I hadn't seen anything like it before, not in this location, not with this particular presentation. I carefully excised a tiny sample of the affected tissue, placing it onto a glass slide. Under the powerful magnification of the microscope, the speck resolved into something crystalline. It was microscopic, multifaceted, and perfectly formed, almost like a shard of perfectly sculpted ice, but with an unusual, almost metallic sheen. It was embedded, not just resting on the surface, but integrated into the delicate neural tissue, surrounded by a faint halo of cellular disruption. My mind raced, cycling through every known pathology, every toxicological agent, every exotic foreign body I had ever encountered or read about. None of them fit. This wasn't a natural mineral deposit, nor was it a common particulate. The precision of its structure, its singular presence, and its specific location felt wrong. It felt deliberate. I leaned closer to the eyepiece, adjusting the focus until the crystalline edges were razor-sharp. The surrounding cells showed signs of apoptosis, programmed cell death, but in a highly localized, almost surgical pattern. It wasn't the widespread damage of a stroke or the inflammatory response to an infection. This was something designed to be precise, to mimic a natural event. A cold certainty settled over me, chilling me far more effectively than the constant low temperature of the chamber. This was no cardiac arrest. This was no natural death. Someone had placed this crystalline structure here with astonishing precision to trigger a specific, localized neurological event that would cascade into a systemic failure, mimicking a heart attack. My gaze drifted from the microscope back to the silent form on the steel table. The man, who had seemed to die a quiet, natural death, was now a victim of something far more insidious. And I, Chen, was the only one who had seen it. The isolation of the chamber, once a comfort, now felt like a spotlight, drawing attention to a truth I was suddenly reluctant to share. I knew, with an unwelcome clarity, that this tiny, impassable anomaly would not only upend my meticulous world, but would likely drag me into something far larger and far more dangerous than I could yet comprehend. The quiet dignity of the dead now carried a heavy secret, and it was mine to bear. The air, scrubbed clean of all but the faint scent of disinfectant and formaldehyde, was a familiar comfort. My scalpel, a familiar extension of my hand, moved with practiced precision. The first layers of tissue yielded easily, revealing the expected internal landscape. The initial findings aligned with the preliminary report. No obvious external trauma, no immediate signs of struggle. The deceased, a man in his late 50s, had been found slumped in his office chair, a picture of sudden, peaceful demise. A cardiac event was the probable cause, a common enough tragedy. But I was not one to rely on probability alone. My job was certainty. I worked through the systems methodically, my gloved hands navigating the delicate architecture of the human body. Each organ was meticulously examined, weighed, and sampled. The heart showed some expected age-related changes, but nothing catastrophic enough to explain such an abrupt collapse without other contributing factors. The lungs were clear, the liver unremarkable. Everything pointed to a straightforward natural death, yet a persistent whisper of unease tugged at the edges of my mind. It was a feeling I'd learned to trust, a faint dissonance in the symphony of the human machine. Finally, I turned my attention to the brain. Carefully, I removed the calvarium, exposing the intricate folds of the cerebrum. The brain tissue itself appeared healthy, no signs of hemorrhage, tumor, or infarct. I sectioned it with painstaking care, my eyes scanning each slice for the minutest deviation. Nothing. My unease intensified. If it wasn't the heart or a stroke, what then? I took a series of tissue samples, focusing on the brainstem, an area often overlooked in routine autopsies unless specific neurological symptoms were reported. Under the powerful magnification of the microscope, the initial slides confirmed healthy-looking neural tissue. I adjusted the focus, my gaze sweeping across the cellular landscape, a landscape I knew intimately. Then I saw it. It wasn't a tumor, nor a rupture, nor a foreign body in the conventional sense. It was far more subtle, a pattern of disruption within the cellular structure itself. Tiny, almost perfectly geometric perforations, like pinpricks made by an impassably fine needle, appeared in a concentrated cluster within the medulla oblongata. They were too uniform, too precise to be natural cellular decay or a product of disease. These were not random voids. They were structured absences, like miniature, perfectly executed excisions. My breath hitched. I'd never encountered anything like it in all my years. The edges of these microperforations were clean, almost crystalline, surrounded by otherwise healthy, intact neural cells. I spent another hour, resectioning, restaining, confirming my initial observation. Each new slide under the microscope presented the same impassable pattern. This wasn't natural. This wasn't an artifact. This was deliberate. I documented everything, meticulously photographing the slides, noting the exact coordinates of the anomalies. My report, usually a dispassionate summary, now carried a weight of urgency. I picked up the internal phone, my fingers hovering over the extension for the chief medical examiner's office. "Chen here," I said when the chief medical examiner answered, his voice gruff. "I've completed the autopsy on the John Doe from yesterday. I found something highly unusual in the brainstem. Microscopic, perfectly geometric disruptions to the neural tissue. It's not an artifact, not a disease process I recognize." There was a pause, a sigh that carried across the line. "Chen, you've been in that isolation chamber for hours. Are you sure you're not seeing patterns where there are none? The preliminary report indicated a probable cardiac event. It's likely post-mortem change, or perhaps a rare, idiopathic lesion." His tone was dismissive, already filing away my findings as an overactive imagination. "No, Chief, this is different," I insisted, my voice tight with frustration. "It's too uniform, too precise. I've never seen anything like it. These are not random. I believe they're significant." "Significant to what, Chen?" "The cause of death. Stick to the cause of death. Time is money. Let's not complicate things with microscopic curiosities unless they directly contribute to the COD. Finalize the report as a presumed cardiac arrest and move on. There are other cases waiting." He hung up before I could argue further. My jaw tightened. Dismissed. It wasn't the first time my more unconventional findings had been met with skepticism, but this felt different. This felt like a deliberate blind spot. I stared at the phone, then back at the microscope, the impossible patterns still vivid in my mind. The deceased deserved more than a presumed cause of death. I knew what I saw. I spent the next hour re-examining my photographs, cross-referencing rare neurological disorders, obscure toxins, anything that might explain the bizarre cellular damage. Nothing fit. The frustration was a hot coal in my stomach. Just as I was about to pack up, the internal message system chimed, announcing a new arrival. A female, late 40s, found collapsed in a public park. Unexplained sudden death. My heart gave a strange lurch. Unexplained. Another one. I pulled up the preliminary details. No obvious trauma, no witnesses to a struggle, no pre-existing conditions reported. The scenario felt eerily familiar. This couldn't be a coincidence. My resolve hardened. They could dismiss my findings on the first case, but if I found the same anomaly in this new arrival, they wouldn't be able to ignore it. Not twice. I had a scalpel, a microscope, and an unwavering dedication to the truth, and the dead, unlike the living, had no reason to lie. The chief pathologist's voice, clipped and dismissive, still echoed in my ears even after the line went dead. Microscopic curiosities. The phrase grated, a dull rasp against my scientific intuition. He wanted a tidy box, a neat label, cardiac arrest. But what I'd seen under the microscope wasn't tidy, and it certainly wasn't a curiosity. It was an anomaly, a whisper of something deeply wrong, and my job wasn't to simplify the truth, but to uncover it, no matter how inconvenient. A cold resolve settled over me, firmer than the chill in the morgue. I wouldn't let this go, not when the dead had something more to say. My gaze drifted to the digital clock on the wall, 7:17 p.m. Most of the staff had already packed up, eager for the evening's reprieve. Good. Fewer eyes. I pulled up the central database, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a practiced rhythm. My search parameters were broad but specific. Adult decedents, sudden death, no clear pre-existing conditions, cause of death listed as presumed cardiac event, or sudden unexplained demise within the last 18 months. There had been a handful of cases that had always nagged at me, ones where the macroscopic findings just didn't quite align with the clinical picture, but the pressure to move on had always been too great. Tonight, that pressure meant nothing. The database coughed up a list. Too many, initially. I narrowed it down further, focusing on cases where the preliminary toxicology screens had been clean, where no obvious trauma or disease process had been evident. 3 cases in particular jumped out. One from 6 months ago, a seemingly healthy construction worker who collapsed on site. Another, 8 months prior, a young architect found unresponsive in her home. And then, a year and a half back, a city council aide who'd simply keeled over during a morning jog. All dismissed as natural causes, all with that same vague, unsatisfying conclusion. My stomach tightened. Could it be? A long shot, perhaps, but the hair on my arms prickled with a premonition. I requested the archived tissue samples, bypassing the usual channels by marking them for re-evaluation of cellular degradation patterns. A perfectly legitimate, if unusual, request for a case already closed. The system, thankfully, didn't question my late-hour diligence. With the sample trays retrieved from the cryogenic storage unit, I made my way to the pathology wing isolation chamber. The room was small, designed for sensitive work, its air filtration system a low, constant sigh. The heavy, insulated door sealed with a soft hiss, muffling the already distant sounds of the morgue. Here, the temperature was meticulously controlled, the surfaces gleaming stainless steel, scrubbed to an almost surgical perfection. The smell of disinfectant was sharper in this enclosed space, a sterile comfort. I powered on the electron microscope, its intricate mechanisms whirring to life. The high-resolution monitor flickered, then settled into a deep, wading black. I carefully placed the slides from the initial case back onto the stage, adjusting the focus with a practiced hand. The cellular landscape swam into view, a vibrant tapestry of reds and purples, punctuated by the delicate architecture of individual cells. There it was, exactly as I remembered. A minute, almost crystalline structure, barely distinguishable from the surrounding cellular matrix, embedded deep within the myocardial tissue. It wasn't a natural inclusion, not a typical cellular artifact. It was too regular, too precise, yet subtle enough to be mistaken for a normal degradation product by anyone not looking for something specific, something impossible. I zoomed in, adjusting the contrast, the image sharpening until the anomaly stood out, a tiny alien shard. My breath hitched. This wasn't a one-off. I carefully swapped the slides, moving to the samples from the construction worker. My hands were steady, but an internal tremor had begun. I navigated through the tissue, my gaze sweeping across the screen, searching. And then there it was again. Identical, same shape, same size, same peculiar integration into the cellular structure. The architect's samples yielded the same result. And finally, the city council aides. 4 cases. 4 seemingly disparate individuals, 4 deaths ruled natural, 4 times this precise, microscopic signature. I leaned back from the microscope, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. The implications were enormous. This wasn't some random, spontaneous cellular aberration. This was a pattern, a deliberate, engineered pattern. Someone had found a way to induce sudden, fatal cardiac events that left behind a nearly undetectable, non-toxic signature, one that mimicked natural causes perfectly. My eyes swept over the case files, which I'd laid out on the sterile counter. Construction worker, architect, city council aide, and the latest, a mid-level executive. What connected them? No obvious demographic, no shared location of death, no immediate social circles. I scrutinized their backgrounds, their employment histories, their last known activities. Nothing. Then a detail caught my eye, a minor footnote in the architect's file, a mention of a recent project bid. I cross-referenced it with the construction workers' company, a subcontractor on the same project. The city council aide had been involved in the initial zoning approvals for that very development, and the executive. His firm provided financial oversight for large-scale urban regeneration initiatives, including that specific one. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. A massive, multi-phase urban renewal project currently reshaping a significant portion of the city's waterfront. Different roles, different companies, but all orbiting the same colossal enterprise. This wasn't just an anomaly anymore. It was a weapon. A silent, untraceable means of eliminating individuals whose lives, in some way, intersected with a high-stakes endeavor. My meticulously ordered world, built on observable facts and scientific method, had just been upended by something far more sinister than a misdiagnosis. I had uncovered a thread, thin and almost invisible, but now I had to decide if I dared to pull it, knowing it could unravel far more than just a few autopsy reports. It was an anomaly, a deliberate aberration, and it demanded my full attention. I stood in the stark, sterile confines of the pathology wing isolation chamber, the hum of the air filtration system, a low, constant drone. This room was my sanctuary, designed for the most delicate and potentially hazardous examinations, a space where I could work undisturbed. Tonight, it felt more like a bunker. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting my own grim expression. I pulled a fresh set of scrubs from the dispenser, the pale green fabric a stark contrast to the red warning signs plastered on the chamber door. No one would bother me here, which was exactly what I needed. On the examination table, the samples from the deceased lay meticulously arranged in Petri dishes, each labeled with my precise hand. Tissue sections, fluid smears, cellular cultures, all containing the same baffling signature I'd found in the cardiac muscle of the latest victim. I'd spent hours yesterday, then more hours this morning, running every conventional test I could think of, all negative. No known toxins, no pathogens, no foreign bodies visible at standard magnification. Just that thing. I slipped on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the thin material a second skin. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the autopsy. The deceased, a seemingly healthy individual, had simply collapsed. No struggle, no signs of distress. A clean death on the surface. But my scalpel had found something else. I leaned over the multi-headed microscope, adjusting the focus knob with a practiced ease. The image resolved. A cluster of cells, normal in every aspect, save for a pinpoint distortion within the mitochondrial structure. It wasn't a rupture, nor a degradation. It was a reconfiguration. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the internal machinery of the cell, consistent across every sample I'd taken. It was too uniform, too precise to be natural. "Impossible," I murmured, the word tasting like ash. My fingers twitched, moving to the advanced spectral analysis attachment. I needed more. I needed to see its composition, its energy signature. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex array of data. I selected a specific region, zooming in on the aberrant mitochondrial structure. The spectral graph painted an astonishing picture. A unique energy signature, highly localized, pulsed within the cell. It wasn't a chemical compound I recognized. It wasn't organic. It was synthetic. A finely tuned nanoscopic disruptor designed to target the very powerhouses of the cells, causing instantaneous systemic cellular failure without leaving a macroscopic trace. A silent, invisible killer. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a curiosity. This was a weapon. A designer poison delivered with impossible precision. And it explained the lack of external trauma, the clean toxicology reports, the chief pathologist's easy dismissal. No one would ever find it unless they knew exactly what they were looking for and had the equipment to see beyond the conventional. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If one person died this way, it could be a fluke, an experimental error. But the chief pathologist had mentioned the rush on other cases. A flicker of memory. 2 other sudden, unexplained deaths in the last month, both high-profile individuals, both ruled natural causes, despite vague whispers of odd circumstances. The initial reports had been filed away before I could get a look. Were they all connected? I pulled up the secure database on the terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard, searching for sudden cardiac arrest, unexplained collapse, high profile. The results scrolled by, a chilling list. Not just 2, but 5 in the last 3 months. All seemingly healthy, all with no pre-existing conditions that could explain such an abrupt demise. All dismissed as natural causes. My gaze drifted back to the spectral graph, the alien signature glowing on the screen. The method was clear. A nanoscopic, synthetic agent targeting cellular mitochondria, inducing a silent, untraceable system collapse. The motive? I leaned back, rubbing my temples. These weren't random people. A tech CEO, a prominent city councilwoman, a renowned investigative journalist, a wealthy real estate developer, and now, the latest victim, a lead prosecutor known for his aggressive stance against organized crime. All individuals with influence, with power, with secrets, all obstacles perhaps to someone else's agenda. This wasn't a lone killer. This was orchestrated. The precision, the advanced technology, the ability to bypass standard forensic detection, it spoke of resources, of an organization operating with impunity. A sophisticated network, perhaps one embedded deep within the city's power structures. If I was right, if I had truly uncovered this, then I wasn't just a pathologist anymore. I was a witness. I was a threat. The isolation chamber, once my refuge, now felt like a glass cage. I was alone with this dangerous truth. The hum of the air filtration system suddenly seemed louder, almost like a warning. My hands, still gloved, clenched into fists. I had the method. I had a strong suspicion about the motive. And I, Chen, had just painted a target on my own back. The chief pathologist's clipped dismissal still rasped in my ears, a dull, grating sound against my scientific intuition. Microscopic curiosities, he'd scoffed. But what I'd seen under the microscope wasn't a curiosity. It was an anomaly, a whisper of something profoundly wrong. My footsteps echoed in the sterile corridor, each one a testament to my resolve. I had no time to waste. The body of the deceased, the one whose heart had whispered secrets, wouldn't remain in my care indefinitely. Bureaucracy, fueled by a desire for expediency, and perhaps a touch of willful blindness, would soon release it. I had to secure my evidence, irrefutable and undeniable, before it was too late. The pathology wing isolation chamber hummed with the low thrum of air filtration. It was a stark, windowless room, designed for containment and meticulous work, not comfort. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting my own grim determination. The air was cool, carrying the faint, metallic tang of disinfectant. In the center, under a sheet, lay the source of my professional rebellion. The isolation chamber was where the most sensitive cases, the ones requiring an extra layer of protection from contamination or prying eyes, were handled. Today, it was my sanctuary and my battleground. I peeled back the sheet, revealing the pale, still form. No visible trauma, no obvious cause of death beyond what the initial external examination suggested. But I knew better. My scalpel, cool and precise in my gloved hand, was my extension, my tool for truth. I moved with a practiced grace, reopening the incision I'd made earlier, my eyes scanning the internal landscape for anything I might have missed, anything that would scream its unnatural origins. My focus narrowed, shutting out the world beyond this chamber. I retrieved the tissue samples I'd already taken, placing them carefully on a fresh slide. The anomaly I'd observed previously, those peculiar, almost crystalline structures embedded within the myocardial tissue, demanded a deeper look. I needed to isolate them, confirm their composition, prove they didn't belong. My microscope, a powerful instrument usually reserved for research, sat ready on a nearby counter. Just as I leaned in, adjusting the focus, a sharp rap echoed on the steel door. My spine stiffened. I didn't flinch, but my movements became infinitesimally slower, my internal alarm bells clanging. I knew that knock. It wasn't a colleague. It was too firm, too insistent. "Doctor, Chen, are I still in there?" A voice called out, muffled by the thick door. It was the security officer, his tone laced with a forced politeness that barely masked an underlying impatience. The chief pathologist requested the chamber be cleared by 1600. It's almost that now. My gaze flickered to the wall clock. 15:58, 2 minutes. They weren't just rushing me, they were cornering me. This wasn't a request. It was an order delivered through an intermediary. They wanted me out, the body prepped for release, my curiosities swept under the rug. "Just finishing up," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the frantic energy surging through me. I didn't wait for a response, knowing he'd likely stand guard, counting down the seconds. My hands flew, working with a speed born of desperation and years of meticulous practice. I had to get this one critical sample. I quickly prepared another section of the affected cardiac tissue, staining it with a specialized dye I usually reserved for highly complex cases. This dye would highlight specific cellular structures and foreign bodies, making them pop under the lens. Time was a luxury I no longer possessed. I slid the new slide onto the stage, adjusting the objective, my eye pressed against the eyepiece. The seconds ticked by, each one a hammer blow against my resolve. The security officer's footsteps outside shifted, his presence a palpable weight. Then I saw it. The peculiar structures were indeed there, unmistakable. But with the new stain, something else revealed itself, something far more definitive. They weren't merely crystalline, they possessed an intricate, almost manufactured regularity. And surrounding them, barely visible even at this magnification, were minute, shimmering particles. They fluoresced faintly under the specific light, a telltale signature. This wasn't a natural mineral deposit or some bizarre physiological anomaly. This was a foreign agent, introduced into the body, designed to mimic a natural event. The particles, barely larger than molecules, suggested a delivery mechanism, a way for these structures to infiltrate the cells without leaving a gross trace. It was sophisticated, insidious. A nanotech signature. The phrase flashed through my mind, but I pushed it aside. No sci-fi. This was real, tangible. It was a specific, engineered material, something that could only be created, not grown. This was my irrefutable evidence. This was the reveal. A louder knock jolted me. "Chen, I'm afraid I'll have to insist. The chief pathologist is waiting for my confirmation." My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of discovery and the crushing weight of the conspiracy unfolding around me. I couldn't just walk out, leaving this truth buried. But I couldn't stay either. I had to be smart. I carefully removed the slide, placing it in a secure, labeled container. This wasn't something I could hand over to the chief pathologist. He'd bury it, just as he tried to bury the case. I needed an ally, someone outside this immediate chain of command, someone who wouldn't dismiss microscopic curiosities. My mind immediately went to the detective. He had a stubborn streak, a relentless pursuit of answers that mirrored my own. He'd seen enough strangeness in this city to keep an open mind, or at least an open ear. But reaching out to him now, from inside this facility, felt like walking into a trap. My phone, my emails, everything could be monitored. I made a quick decision. I pulled out my personal phone, tucked deep in my lab coat pocket, a device strictly forbidden in the isolation chamber, but one I always carried for emergencies. I typed a quick, cryptic message, a coded reference to our previous case, one that only he would understand. "The anomaly is confirmed. Meet me discreetly." I sent it, my thumb hovering over the send button for a long second, the risk stark and terrifying. This was it. I was stepping out of the sterile confines of the lab and into the murky, dangerous world of the living. But it was my only path forward. I straightened, my determination hardening into steel. The game had changed, and I had just made my first move. My thumb finally lifted, leaving the screen of my phone dark and cold. The message, a meticulously compiled report detailing the almost imperceptible anomalies across the initial 3 bodies, was gone, launched into the digital ether. It was a point of no return. I felt a strange tremor, not of fear exactly, but of something akin to a seismic shift beneath my feet. My world, once a stable, predictable landscape of cellular structures and chemical reactions, was now tilting. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the lab's ventilation system the only sound. The sterile air, usually a comfort, felt suddenly thin, as if the oxygen had been replaced by anticipation. I had allied myself with the detective, a calculated risk, but a risk nonetheless. His face, etched with a weariness that mirrored my own growing unease, flashed in my mind. He was a man who understood the darkness of the city, the kind of darkness I usually only observed under a microscope, safely contained. Now, I was stepping into it. My gaze drifted to the reinforced door of the pathology wing isolation chamber. It wasn't just a place for highly contagious cases. It was also where I conducted my most sensitive analyses, shielded from even the slightest environmental contamination. The very thought of what lay inside, the final piece of this macabre puzzle, tightened a knot in my stomach. This was where the impossible had become undeniable. The chamber was a stark, almost monastic space. Stainless steel surfaces gleaming under harsh LED lights, an advanced fume hood dominating one wall, and my specialized electron microscope humming softly in the corner. On the central examination table, meticulously arranged under a clear plastic dome, was the excised tissue sample. Not just any sample, but the minute sliver of subcutaneous fat from the fourth victim, the one whose death had been dismissed as an unfortunate accident. My earlier analysis had revealed a faint, almost ghost-like discoloration within the adipose cells, something I'd initially attributed to post-mortem changes. But the consistency, the almost crystalline structure of the anomaly had gnawed at me. I'd spent hours, days, chasing this phantom, recalibrating my instruments, cross-referencing against every known pathological phenomenon. And then, the reveal. Under the electron microscope, at magnification levels that rendered individual cells into vast landscapes, I had found it. Not a discoloration, but an intricate lattice of synthetic polymer, impossibly thin, almost transparent, woven into the cellular matrix. It wasn't a foreign body in the traditional sense, but something engineered to mimic and integrate. It was designed to dissolve, to disappear, leaving no trace for conventional toxicology. But my unconventional methods, my stubborn refusal to accept the obvious, had caught it. This wasn't just a toxin, it was a signature. A highly advanced, almost invisible calling card left by whoever was orchestrating these deaths. Each victim had carried a variant of this same synthetic structure, subtly different, but undeniably linked. It explained why the initial autopsies, even my own first pass, had missed it. It was a silent, ephemeral killer, leaving behind nothing but the illusion of natural causes. I adjusted the microscope's focus, the tiny, intricate web filling the eyepiece. It shimmered with an almost internal light, a testament to its alien design. This discovery was a detonation, not just for the conspiracy, but for my own life. I was a pathologist. My world was the quiet dignity of the dead, the silent pursuit of truth within their stillness. I wasn't equipped for the living, for the dangers that surely accompanied unmasking something this sophisticated, this high level. I could walk away. I could bury this finding, retreat into the safe, sterile confines of my lab. No one would ever know. The risks were immense: my career, my reputation, my very safety. The people behind this, they had resources, reach. I had seen the subtle ways they operated, the silent efficiency of their work. They wouldn't tolerate exposure. Could I live with that? Could I turn my back on the scientific truth I had so painstakingly uncovered? The answer was a definitive, if terrifying, no. My reclusive nature, my meticulousness, these weren't weaknesses, they were my strengths. They were what allowed me to see what others missed, and now they would be my weapons. I began carefully documenting the evidence, taking high-resolution images, preparing slides, sealing samples in tamper-proof containers. Each movement was deliberate, precise. My hands, usually steady, held a tremor that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with the profound shift occurring within me. I was no longer just an observer. I was an actor in a play far more dangerous than any I had ever imagined. The hum of the chamber, the sterile air, the silent evidence, they were all preparing me. I was preparing myself. The alliance with the detective was fragile, yes, but it was all I had. And with this evidence, I would make it unshakable. The sterile confines of the lab had given me the truth. Now I had to carry it into the murky world of the living, knowing full well that the living would fight back. I was ready, or at least I had to be. I felt a strange tremor, not of fear, but of anticipation, like the taut silence before a storm breaks. The die was cast. Now I just had to brace for the deluge. The fluorescent hum of the pathology wing usually offered a comforting backdrop to my work, a steady pulse in the quiet world of the dead. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. Each step down the polished linoleum corridor echoed too loudly, a drumbeat against the rising tide of my own adrenaline. My destination was further in, a place rarely used, reserved for cases of extreme contagion or, as it turned out, extreme contention. The pathology wing isolation chamber stood at the end of the long hall, its heavy steel door marked with a stark biohazard symbol. The walls were clad in seamless stainless steel, the floor a non-porous epoxy. A single, adjustable examination table dominated the center, with a bank of monitors and a high-resolution microscope station against one wall. It was designed for containment, for scrutiny, for truth. My truth tonight. I moved with practiced efficiency, my hands steady despite the internal churn. I arranged them carefully on the stage of the digital microscope, connecting it to the main display panel. Then came the external hard drive, containing the cross-referenced imaging, the spectral analysis, the irrefutable data. I loaded the presentation, the first slide a simple title, Anomalous Cellular Inclusions, a multi-victim analysis. The minutes stretched, each one tightening the spring of tension in my chest. I checked the focus, adjusted the lighting on the screen. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with the unspoken confrontation to come. I heard the distant click of the corridor door, then the measured footsteps approaching. Not one set, but several. They stopped outside the isolation chamber. A brief, hushed exchange, then the keypad clicked. The heavy door hissed open again. Chen. The voice was smooth, edged with a barely concealed irritation. It belonged to the director, a man whose ambition often outstripped his patience for inconvenient truths. Behind him stood the lead investigator, his expression a mixture of professional skepticism and genuine curiosity. A third figure, an unfamiliar security officer, stood silently by the door, his presence a clear statement. I turned from the illuminated screen, my posture deliberately calm. Director, lead investigator, thank I for coming. My voice was level, betraying none of the tremor I felt just moments ago. I believe what I have to show warrants this highly secure environment. The director stepped further into the chamber, his gaze sweeping over the sterile space, then settling on the glowing screen. I claimed a critical discovery in my message. We're busy people, Chen. This had better be substantial. It is, I replied, moving to the control panel. Please observe. I brought up the first image on the large screen, a magnified cross-section of cerebral tissue from the initial victim. This is a standard histological slide, stained with hematoxylin and eosin, on its own unremarkable. I clicked, and the image zoomed, a red box highlighting a specific, almost invisible area. However, with polarized light microscopy, a different picture emerges. The screen shifted, and suddenly, tiny, iridescent flecks sparkled within the neural pathways, scattered like microscopic diamonds. They were crystalline, angular, and utterly out of place. These are not naturally occurring biological structures, I explained, my voice gaining a quiet intensity. They are uniform in size, approximately 50 nanometers in length, and their chemical composition, determined by energy-dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, indicates a unique, non-organic silicate complex, one that doesn't exist in nature, nor in any known industrial contaminant. The lead investigator leaned closer to the screen, a frown deepening on his face. What are we looking at, Chen? A manufactured construct, I stated, my gaze flicking between him and the director. And it's not isolated. Here from the second victim. I clicked, always consistent within that victim. They are not random, they are precisely targeted. I brought up a final slide, a composite overlay of all three cases, highlighting the identical nature of the inclusions. This isn't an anomaly, Director. This is an engineered delivery system, or a marker. Something that shouldn't be there, placed there deliberately, post-mortem, or perhaps even pre-mortem, in a way that bypasses all conventional toxicological screens and detection methods. The director's face, usually impassive, now showed a flicker of something akin to disbelief, then a hardening resolve. Fabricated. Chen, are you suggesting? What exactly are you suggesting? His tone was sharp, a clear attempt to regain control. I'm suggesting, I met his gaze directly, that these deaths are not natural, nor are they simple homicides. The precision, the advanced material, the systematic placement across three seemingly unrelated individuals. This points to a sophisticated operation. A high-level conspiracy designed to leave no trace, save for this impossible anomaly that only the most meticulous examination could ever uncover. The lead investigator straightened, his earlier skepticism replaced by a grim realization. He looked at the director, then back at the screen, his eyes lingering on the sparkling, unnatural inclusions. The director, however, was already moving. He took a step towards me, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Chen, you're treading on very thin ice. This is an outrageous claim, without an identified perpetrator. The evidence is right here, I interrupted, gesturing to the glowing screen. The perpetrator left their signature, Director. A signature so small, so precise, it was designed to be overlooked. But I didn't overlook it. The director's jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed. He was cornered, his usual dismissal tactics rendered useless by the undeniable data. The truth, in its crystalline form, was finally out. The silence in the pathology wing isolation chamber stretched, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the faint, rhythmic beep of a distant monitor. The director's gaze, usually so impenetrable, flickered from the glowing screen to my face, then back again. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching near his ear. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of undeniable truth. A signature, I say. His voice was a low growl, devoid of its usual booming authority. It was a question, but it was also an admission. He knew. The evidence, meticulously laid out, pixel by pixel, was too precise to refute. The microscopic, engineered anomaly, the impassable detail I'd spent weeks chasing, was now staring him in the face. I met his gaze, my own resolve unyielding. Not just a signature, Director. A meticulously crafted, almost arrogant declaration of control, designed to be missed by anyone who wasn't looking for exactly this. I watched his shoulders slump, just a fraction, but enough for me to see the shift. The fortress of his denial had crumbled. He turned from the screen, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. Get the Chief of Internal Affairs down here, and the District Attorney, immediately. His voice regained some of its command, but it was directed outward, not at me. The words were a cascade, a dam breaking. Secure all access points to this facility. No one leaves, no one enters without my express permission, and notify the Commissioner. Tell them, Doctor, Chen has uncovered something significant. The flurry that followed was immediate, almost violent in its efficiency. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, swarmed the corridors. Doors clanged shut. Phones buzzed with urgent calls. I stood there, amidst the controlled chaos, watching the machinations of justice finally grind into motion. The director, now a man of action, barked orders, his eyes alight with a cold fury. The reveal was complete. The high-level conspiracy, the network of complicity that had allowed these deaths to be dismissed, was exposed. The mastermind, the architect of this intricate, lethal design, would be unmasked. A strange exhaustion washed over me. It wasn't just physical. It was a mental fatigue, the kind that settles deep in the bones after a prolonged siege. I had done it. I had given the dead their voice. But the cost, the lives lost, the danger I'd courted, the reclusive world I'd shattered. Days blurred into a whirlwind of interviews, depositions, and further analysis. The pathology wing isolation chamber became a hub of intense activity, its sterile environment now buzzing with the energy of a full-scale investigation. My findings were corroborated, dissected, and then reassembled into a damning indictment. The names, when they finally surfaced, sent ripples of shock through the city's elite. High-ranking officials, powerful executives, individuals once thought untouchable, were implicated. The scope of the conspiracy was vast, far beyond my initial, terrifying suspicions. It was a hydra, and I had severed one of its most venomous heads. The immediate storm had passed, leaving behind a changed landscape. The air still felt different, lighter yet also heavier with the weight of what I now knew. My microscope sat on its stand, a silent sentinel. I picked up a slide, a routine tissue sample, and slid it under the lens. The familiar world of cellular structures, of life and decay, unfolded before me. But it wasn't the same. My focus was sharper, perhaps, but my perspective had broadened. I saw not just the cells, but the stories they told, the lives they represented, and the larger forces that could impact them. The reclusive pathologist who had once found solace only in the absolute certainty of science now understood the turbulent, often dangerous currents of the living world. A knock on the open door startled me. It was a colleague, a junior pathologist who usually kept a respectful distance. "Dr. Chen," he began, his voice hesitant. "The director asked me to tell you. The first indictments have been handed down, and they are requesting your testimony for the grand jury next month." I nodded. a faint tremor running through me. It wasn't over, not truly. Justice was a slow, grinding machine, and I was now a part of its mechanism. My place in the world had subtly, irrevocably shifted. I was no longer just the brilliant, reclusive forensic pathologist, and I knew, with a certainty as clear as any slide under my microscope, that I wouldn't stop looking. The dead had spoken through me, and I would continue to listen.